Hi, everyone, and welcome to The Quad Live, a podcast on all things about the sports and active lifestyle industry. I am joined today for a conversation about women's sports by two people who have lots of experience, Jayne Appel Marinelli and Violet Alama. And Jayne, why don't I turn to you for just a little bit of your background in sports the last couple of years?
I should start with that Annie and I are first cousins.
That we are.
I played 4 years at Stanford University under Coach Vanderveer and was drafted fifth to play for San Antonio Stars. Played for 7 years in WNBA, a couple stints overseas in Turkey and China, and with the USA team, and now am the Director of Player Relations at the WNBA, so the players side of the W. Yeah.
You have also been busy growing your family the last couple of years.
Yes, I've got 4 under 6. It's busy, but fun.
Good. And Violet, why don't you tell us about your background in sports?
First off, thank you for having me, Annie, and it's an incredible honor to sit with you, Jayne. My name's Violet Alama. I am from Hawaii, born and raised. I played basketball at the Cal State University of Northridge. 4 years there. After that, I went and I played overseas in Israel. I was a dual citizen, so I got to play on the Israeli national team as well. Since then, I moved back to Hawaii and did some time coaching over there at a high school. And over a year ago, I moved to the Marin area to be the athletic director with the Bay Clubs.
And we love having you as
Thank you
athletic.
so
And you
much.
also do strength and conditioning, like you're a performance coach for athletes as well, correct?
Yes, I have my undergraduate and my graduate degrees in strength and conditioning, certified strength and conditioning coach, and I like to focus in on athletic performance.
That's great. That's great. Well, women's sports recently has really dominated a lot of what we've been reading about in the news, and rightfully so. It's been a pretty exciting, season with what was going on with the NC2A and the championships, as well as the WNBA draft. But there's just been conversation. You can feel momentum, candidly, is what I would say. And I come from having had someone play professional sports in our family, we've been kind of aware of it, but it feels very much like everybody's aware of it right now, which is great. And as we were preparing for today's conversation, I spent a little bit of time just like looking back at some of the pivotal moments, that have happened. And it was interesting to kind of see, going back to the 70s, right? And you had Title IX in 1972. And then you had Billie Jean King put together the Women's Sports Foundation in 1974 after she played her match where she beat Bobby Riggs, which wasn't a name that I remembered. In 1984, you had women competing in the marathon at the Olympics down in LA, and the U.S. female won, Joan Benoit. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. And then 1991 was when FIFA Women's did the first Women's World Cup, right? So that's really soccer kind of took off. And it was, what I think is interesting is that you have this like tennis embrace with Billie Jean King, soccer comes in, and then, you're starting to see basketball as well. So it's multiple sports, which I find to be like great from a platform. 1994, Venus Williams went pro at the age of 14. Wild. Can you imagine going pro at 14?
Beast.
Yeah.
Right?
That's awesome.
Right? I
Amazing.
was just watching, is it King Williams, the movie that's about their family. It was really fascinating. And then in 1995, ahead of the 96 Olympics, the U.S. really went all in on a one-year training program for the women's basketball team, coached by Tara, and kind of decided, like, this is now how we will prepare the athletes. And then the W in 1997. So, a lot of groundwork has been laid. If you think about where we are today, it didn't just happen overnight. There's been a lot of stuff that's been happened. What inspired you when you were growing up and like playing sports, all the sports?
I think just being exposed to them. My dad he took me to the St. Mary's College women's and men's games. Obviously, growing up with 3 brothers, I was constantly playing sports. In high school, my parents had a rule: you either have a job or you play a sport or you're in a club. So I picked sport. But I was exposed to and played multiple sports. I swam, I did basketball, I played water polo, and met a lot of different teammates, played for a lot of different coaches, and I think that benefited throughout my entire career, even professionally. And so the inspiration probably coming mainly from my family of wanting to be involved in sports, and that's where my friendships grew from, and competitiveness grew from, really. To being older was probably, Tara and Pat Summitt, and really leading the charge of, Tara set up the chairs for her first game at Stanford for the fans, to now showing up for sold out arenas at Maples, to see the growth and the time and effort they've put in. They've definitely become those role models at their universities. And, when Pat was alive, all she did for the game as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Violet, what about you? Where did you get inspiration from growing up?
Similar to kind of your background, I always played outside, didn't play a ton of organized sports in Hawaii, but I was always outside playing football, volleyball, basketball. Those were probably the main sports. And we had a big family, and so we didn't usually segregate between boys and girls. It was all of the cousins together, and if you were maybe the same height, you got matched up against them, and there wasn't so much focus on, like, the boy cousins could play tackle football, but the girl cousins couldn't play. I got the luxury to kind of participate in anything I wanted to as a kid. Growing up in Hawaii, I had a lot of role models remotely. I remember reading Pat Summitt's book. Mm-hmm. I remember reading Coach Vivian Stringer's book. I was a huge fan of Candace Parker. She was my idol. In 2006, she dunked in the NCAA tournament game twice. And I printed that paper out and I taped it onto my notebook, and it was with me for school, and I had her on my front, and she was definitely I looked up to her. I looked up to Jayne, as I maybe briefly spoke to earlier. Jayne played at Stanford, and she played against Hawaii. Hawaii always had this tournament right around Christmas, and they invited the biggest schools to come play in it, and it was an opportunity for kids in Hawaii, female young little girls in Hawaii, to see the type of competition that was out there. I think either Iowa or Iowa State was in that. Baylor was always in it. The Paris twins with Oklahoma, they were in it. Jayne Appel absolutely smashed her game that I went to in high school with my dad.
We didn't go to the beach that whole time, by the way.
Yeah, that's probably why they smashed their game. And Coach Vanderveer was another idol of mine. I excelled in academics and athletics in high school, and I didn't want to necessarily compromise one. My dream was to be able to excel in both. So Stanford was kind of always the dream school, but the way that Coach Vanderveer coached and her culture that was created was definitely something that appealed to me. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention Coach Dawn Staley, who's my current new favorite coach to admire and emulate, I guess.
She has had quite a couple of years, that's for sure.
She was on the 96 Dream Team with Coach Vanderveer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also one of the hardest coaches I've ever played for.
Really?
Yeah.
Not surprising. There's a lot of discipline to get back-to-back championships,
Yes.
right? And to go undefeated. Yes. So that really brings us in some ways to today, right? If you think about the history, and 2024 and even 2023 saw some kind of like very momentous moments. One that I love just because it isn't what you would expect is the August 2023 Nebraska v. Nebraska Omaha women's volleyball game that had 92,000 people attending. Just a sense of like that's a whole sea change from what you would expect for women's volleyball. But really, where the story lies and where there can be, I think, a lot of just taking the momentum of today and leapfrogging it forward is what happened with the 2024 the NC2A finals plus the draft, right? And really, a lot of it's called the Caitlin Clark phenomenon, and she deserves a ton of credit. But there are also other excellent players that are coming out of this year that went into the draft. But what you saw, and if you look at the numbers, the women's finals, which was noon on Sunday, at its height had 24 million viewers, and the men's finals, 6 p.m. Monday, had 14 million viewers. But the ad revenue was upside down, right? The women's, that finals made 1% of what the men's did. We'll get to that, why that's important. But another thing that you're seeing a lot of momentum in is the draft. So the WNBA season had its highest viewership this year, but the draft had 2.5 million people watch, right? And you've got Angel Reese, you've got Cameron Brink, you've got Camila Cardoso, you've got names that people are interested in. I would say Caitlin Clark's leading the way by far. People want to go see her play now, and you're going to find people that are like, when's Indiana in town where I can go watch them? But I look at it, if you look at it from a business perspective, there's a real opportunity, right? And I think there's an opportunity for the players in this moment to say, okay, how do we use this momentum and leapfrog it? And, Jayne, you are working with the Players Association, right? Like, that's your focus and for what you're doing for your job. Tell me what, your sense of this moment in time is, and how do you, from a player standpoint, how do you take advantage of this and have it be, instead of another, just it continues to gain, like you jump it? Like, where are the ways to really have ownership of this?
I mean, imagine if those numbers weren't flipped, right? And how many more eyeballs would have been on those brands if they were a part of the women's game and the women's broadcast. I think for the players, they're challenging and accepting all of these brands and marketing opportunities to be like, we've been going, and now there just are more eyeballs on our game, and we're welcoming you to come and join. Like, we're not gonna be like, if you're all about promoting women's sports and having us come along, and the W is still a young league, compared to where the NBA was at this point in their tenure. We're actually far ahead of that. So I would just encourage, as the players are encouraging brands and broadcast partners and licensing opportunities for these brands to come along with us. And I think I know they will see a better, return of interest on their investments.
Because ultimately, when you talk about like getting paid, right, and how are players getting paid, it begins and starts with ad revenue, right? Like, that has to be there, and can't just say we're going to pay everybody X millions of dollars if you don't have that support behind them. And I look at it as players have an opportunity to look at the brands that have given them sponsorship deals or that they're partners with and say, we want you buying ad time, right? You're driving that opportunity. That's one way. That's one venue of taking this, and like Tara setting up the chairs, doing the work. How do they do the work to promote like a shift in the networks and a shift in like how that's looked at? I think is really critical. Violet, what are your thoughts in terms of like how players can be more offensively involved in this and have it be like it's a do the work time? And some of this is somewhat Bay Club, it's a Bay Club mentality. Right. There's a bit of like the grit of it, right? And make sure that, it's not just a because we should get it, it's a because we are doing the work to get it.
I think a good example would be something like 2 days ago, Candace Parker just retired, right? And so she wrote a letter to the game of basketball, more or less, but in it she said that this is not the end for me in the game of basketball. She said, I'm a businesswoman. I will own an NBA team, a WNBA team. She will own broadcasting, production, companies. She had mentioned Domino's. She mentioned some other sports that she thought she would invest in. And so for me, it's she's a trailblazer in this sense that she's seeking out people to invest outright. So she's going to invest in herself in owning a WNBA team and bringing it to a high profitability business and leading the way and hopefully encouraging others to kind of get on board and invest in women's sports, because it's not just it's not just for equity, it's a smart business decision.
It is a smart business decision, and I think another way to look at it is to look at creating efficiencies. You talk about that a lot in business. We do here for sure, in terms of how do you take something and it's like, can I bundle, right? And when you look at women's sports overall, with like one way to look at it would be what tennis does, right? Men and women play same season. They're big tournaments. You're having the finals, and so there's momentum built in that. And sometimes you're seeing somebody that you maybe wouldn't necessarily have because it's all happening at the same time. We sometimes float around an idea about like should you bundle the WNBA and the NBA season, just because of an efficiency standpoint, right? There's momentum around like the sport of basketball. Jayne, I thought you had a really good point of view in terms of like being able to get there, because there's a benefit to not playing year round when you go overseas, but there's a flip side to that as well, and I'll let you kind of talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of things. There has to be enough broadcast opportunity, right? So if you have however many NBA games on a night as well as WNBA games, can they all be on TV and accessible for fans to see everywhere, which then allows for more buy-ins for advertisers or brands to be a part of it. So there's that challenge. But I think another challenge is there's only, for this next season, which is just started, training camp, there's 144 jobs for the woman to play. So we would need a lot more teams compared to the 450 NBA players.
And you're saying you need a lot more teams mainly because then those that aren't playing, Violet, like you, that played in Israel, those that aren't playing here in the WNBA need the opportunity,
to go
want
overseas.
the opportunity to go overseas, because there's just not as many spots here and to play professionally.
Right, and they have to capitalize. If they don't get one of the 144 spots, they have to go overseas and make their livelihood. So if the W season and the overseas season are at the same time, and if W would not be playing during the summertime, which can be a little bit of a tougher market with families going on vacation and whatnot, but it also allows for the W to have their spotlight. So I don't know if combining necessarily would allow for that growth that needs to happen for more spots and more opportunity, and for players to continue to improve their play, right? Like, you have to play to get better, and overseas is kind of providing that right now.
You would almost go, but there should be a place, and again, this is the hypothetical world, like where you get to enough positions here where you could potentially combine, create some of these efficiencies, and then it's just like the men's. There are those that play overseas now because they're not playing in the NBA. The women's would have the same thing, right? The evolving.
We also don't have a G League though, right? So that's a whole development league that we don't even have the capability to have. So our G League is essentially overseas. Whereas the men, they have that. The Warriors can send to Santa Cruz and pull up from Santa Cruz, and they have a whole different development system for getting to the NBA. On top of the women play for 4 years or from college we don't have a one and done rule. Our CBA, you have to play for 4 years, or you have to be a part of your graduating class. There's no leaving early, and that's because there's 144 jobs. You're coming and taking someone else's job, and you should probably get your degree before leaving. So
an interesting perspective.
For your second career, because your W career is, 1, not guaranteed, 2, generally pretty short right now. When our rookies came in, the Camilla, the Angel, Caitlin, Cam, they all just came into our office and, we're like, what are you going to do in 4 years? To the rest of the rookies. Hopefully they all make a roster, right? But that means we're also losing veterans. But it kind of shocks them. We're like, hey, the average career is less than 4 years. And what's your next profession going to be?
Right. I remember relating to football that somebody was saying, as they were talking to the majority of the guys that are being recruited, they said NFL stands not for long, right? Like your mindset needs to be, you've got to be doing, what's your afterwards going to be, right? Which is a good thing to think about. And there's a lot you can take what you have learned in professional sports and leverage it to a career really well.
And your networking opportunities, right? Like these these professional athletes now can benefit off of all the new brand partnerships they're being opened up to by becoming a professional, and carrying over from the NIL and at the collegiate landscape, really.
Right.
So.
Right. There was a pivotal time back in 1979, as I was doing all my historical research. Larry Bird and Magic Johnson were both rookies in the NBA. And if you just do a Google search, like when did the NBA catch fire, it was really that year, right? And it does seem like the W has this opportunity to kind of catch fire this year with this freshman class coming in and so much support for it. Deloitte actually is forecasting that women's sports, elite sports, will generate a revenue that surpasses $1 billion this year. So that's like this milestone for ad revenue. And when you think about that, you know, I do think that there's an opportunity for these athletes early to start. It's like new foundation for this. We're going to give a great fan experience, right? If you think like that's the piece of it, and if the fan experience is excellent, these dollars follow, right? An opinion. Do either one of you have an opinion on like what makes the great fan experience, or what would be added into that? If you were an athlete right now thinking through like, I want this to be a pivotal time in my own personal career and in the W, what you would be doing?
That's interesting. You talk about the fan experience. I just recently listened to Jess Smith, the president of the new expansion team for the Golden State, talk about one problem she was interested in solving, and that was how to create a fan experience for the Golden State team that doesn't yet exist, how she was going to leverage maybe the men's fans or the community. I think that knowledge is first off. I think in my day-to-day, most people don't even really recognize that women are playing basketball and that they're doing excellent. And in comparison of stats, maybe they're surpassing their male counterparts. So I think for me, like knowledge, spreading the word, I think that to create a fan experience, one, winning, that's probably the most important thing. No one wants to watch a losing team. So I think as far as getting the right pieces and components and leadership to create a winning team, but I think that we have an opportunity to, if you think about it, half of the people in the world are women, right? And so that's a huge population that I think the WNBA needs to tap into, and not to segregate or, you know, not to be attractive to men. But I think first maybe let's create a fan experience that little girls will enjoy and moms will enjoy, and then little boys will enjoy and the dads will enjoy with the families, and offer the exposure to younger athletes of what is possible.
Yeah, and I think that if you look at, I feel like most sports venues are they do a pretty good job across the board of like being very family friendly most often. I would say one fan experience that I find to be really critical is having enough fans there, right? Like walking into, any kind of venue and it's, a quarter full or a third full, you're like, it just doesn't have the same energy. And that is also a piece of it, is like, is it dynamic pricing? What is it, right, that brings that enough people, like the finals for the WNBA at Barclays Center, I was sold out, right? The Aces won, second year in a row that they've won. You're gaining that momentum. The Barclays Center.
Super teams.
Right. The Barclays Center, I've been there before to watch some basketball. That is a great venue. I was actually there watching college basketball a couple years ago, and it was fantastic. But you want to create that. Nobody expects every game to be a sellout. Even some of the great teams don't have every game be a sellout, but more of that. And what does that look like? What are your thoughts?
again, two parts, in terms of when it comes to the athletes, right? You're going to watch these teams play. So I think that women athletes are almost too accessible to a fault to their fans. Like, you could tweet at one of our players and you might get a response. You tweet at LeBron, you're probably not going to get a response, right? And these are our top players. You could tweet at Asia and she might respond to you, and I think that's really cool. And I think our not just the W, you talk women's soccer, volleyball, hockey, they're relatable. They're player parents, they're businesswomen, they're brand ambassadors. They can kind of touch a bunch of different touch points. So that's on like the athlete side. On the house side of like the venues you talked about, it was interesting. A lot of a couple W teams went kind of to smaller venues in the past. And this season, you're seeing teams are actually moving venues for certain games for when Caitlin Clark comes into town, or Vegas, New York, the super teams. And, like Seattle's hanging out there too. And people are like, why are they not a super team? They've got NECA and Sky and Jewel, and they're kind of hiding out in the Pacific Northwest right now of like, we're coming, we're here, and so you're seeing these teams and ownership groups having to move their games to bigger venues to allow for more fans. And I agree. I think the more fans that you walk into, you're like, oh, this is cool. Like, I want to be a part of this. You come back. And you continue to go to the games. It's getting the person in the building the first time and making sure that first experience is dynamic. And then they're like, yeah, I want to come and I'm going to bring a few friends or have my kids bring friends. And I think that's where you start to build, but you got to get them in the door the first time.
I agree. I think that statement, it resonates across a lot of businesses. There's always that, like, you convert somebody often, we talk about like 50% of the time when you just get them through the door to experience it, right? And I think that is like
show them your product.
The key piece of like both, the business, the player, like that's part of the responsibility. You got to get people through the door and then make sure that that's that great experience. Moving on to a little bit of a different topic, but one that does get brought up a lot, and I know was brought up as we kind of all continue to like look at the women's basketball, but is, what the contracts are, the professional contracts are. There's a lot of talk about what Caitlin Clark signed for versus what you're getting paid to play in college, and then sponsorships playing into that. And, I don't know that anybody has answers. NIL is very new, right? And there's still a lot of kind of work being done to organize, put guardrails up. There was a legal ruling that came out in ESPN yesterday that, is definitely beginning to define what's going to happen in the schools. But, what's your reaction to somebody, saying that they would stay in college an extra year or two because they're making more there versus potentially if they went professional?
I would be like, you don't think those brands are going to follow you professionally? They're going to pay you as an 18-year-old. They're going to definitely pay you as a 22-year-old who probably has a little bit more sense on your shoulders.
Yeah.
So I think they're coming with us. I've seen them come with our players from college to professional.
Yeah, I agree. And I think there's definitely more to offer as a professional, and you don't know what else is out there. And I think that's kind of a falsity that they're going to lose money by going pro and they're making more in college with the NIL, because I do believe these companies will follow you, and you'll probably attract more companies.
I think it's also a bit of that, like, everyone reads the headlines, right? And so when you're reading about, you always get the big numbers for the NIL stuff, but the majority of players, male and female, are not making these big deals. There's some programs, and it always hits the news, and it becomes like the topic. But for the most part, it really is like you're going to get more of the brand sponsorships. I think more should be happening though on the female side, like the better shoe deals, and looking at like how does that continue to grow. Caitlin definitely got a large one, but there's players, your top players, who still don't have like deals that they should. And that's one of those pieces where it's like, what's the offense move there? What's the how do we get that to happen?
We just keep talking about it, keep pushing for it. We earlier before we started recording, we talked about where's Asia's shoe? Yep. My first pair of shoes was Cheryl Swoop's, and that was my first pair of basketball shoes. So I'm waiting. I'll buy them. I'll be first in line.
Well, and as we begin to think about wrapping up here, we mentioned that we are getting to the Bay Area a team in 2025.
Woo!
I'm super excited about that. I'm definitely going to the games. How does that work? The whole team, what do they do? How does the team come together? I don't know a lot about how a brand new team gets put together.
Dispersal draft. I mean, it's all interesting, right? Because at the end of this season, the league and the Players Association have the potential opportunity to opt out of our current agreement and negotiations. I don't know which way the players are voting. I don't know which way the league's voting. But that could definitely shake things up for 2025, being the Golden State, whoever their team name will be.
Right.
That first year for them could be a negotiations year. So we'll see how they build out their roster, and I'm excited. I'm excited for all the old Sacramento fans to be able to come down. Everyone from Cal, Stanford, St. Mary's to come in. I think they'll do great. They'll have a great fan base out here. So
the Bay Area loves sports in general. I mean,
Yes.
I think it's an excellent place, and we've lost some sports teams the last couple of years, so I think it's a great time to welcome in a sports team, and
Right.
I feel like there's good momentum around this right now, so it seems like a really good time. Well, I wanted to say thank you. It's super interesting to hear different perspectives and kind of understand where we are in this moment in time, and see if we can't through efforts of players and ownership and the brands behind it, leapfrog right where we are today to where we would be in 5 years. But I really appreciate your time today joining us.
thanks for having us.
Absolutely.
Thank you for having me.